Hi, Ricky. Welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Okay, so let's start. It's the year 2017, and you decided to run 3,700 miles across America. Why did you decide to do that?
It was something that I had planned. I'd wanted to do for quite a while. I read this book when I was in high school called A Walk Across America by Peter Jenkins, and it had a rather profound effect on me. It's something that I kind of always wanted to do when I was maybe 19 or 20. I got on a bicycle and tried to bike across the country, but after 3 days, I felt as though I had completely destroyed my knee, and so I boxed my bike up, sent it home, and bought myself a plane ticket to Italy instead, and went there for 6 weeks and spent all my money. And then in the years in between that and 2017, I kind of took on this position as a full-time professional athlete for Solomon and sort of for myself. I traveled all around the country and around the world doing mountain and trail and ultra races, and it was just an incredible opportunity where I got to see the better part of the world through the eyes of a professional athlete. And then as I was getting into my mid to late 30s, it just kind of occurred to me that I knew so much more of the world than I did of my own home country. So it was 2015, 2016 when I started bringing this run across the country. And the 2016 elections happened, and I myself, like many other people, thought that it was going to go a different direction. And when it went for Donald Trump, I looked at this run that I had already had planned to go across the country and realized that it was going to be a lot more interesting and informative than I had ever thought. And so that's the lead up in a nutshell right there.
So let's just define your run was quote unquote unsupported. What does that mean?
So there's a lot of different ways to go across the country on foot. It's its own sort of little niche of things that people can do with their spare time and spare money and energy. A lot of people that go for records going across the country can have a support crew. Excuse me, can have a support crew of up to several cars and many people, 5 to 10 people, with
Wow.
budgets of anywhere from a few $1,000s. That would be as quite the budget trip, to upwards of 50 to $100,000 to pay for
Wow.
everything to get across the country. When I was organizing my trip across the country, I do have a small following of people that watch my exploits, whether that be races or running projects such as this one. I knew that they would be watching my run across the country and subsequently the film and the book that I produced afterwards. And I simply wanted to do this trip to create an experience that I felt was accessible, maybe not to everybody. I don't expect that everybody can leave their job, leave their family, pool even a budget amount of money to go across the country, but to create an experience that was accessible to most people, and that was one of the number one things, was to have a pretty slim budget for something like this. And for me, that meant going self-supported.
And how
So
big was your
having
budget?
for the total of 5 months, I did about $5,000. So it was about $1,000 a month,
Wow.
which is, if we do our math on that, that's poverty level existence for that amount of time. So that really was just food every day, a hotel room once a week or once every 10 days, and paying my cell phone bill. And that's about it.
Wow. So, and if you guys watch the documentary, you'll see Rickey with just a small backpack, and that's pretty much all you had.
Yeah.
I, I didn't know that you actually had a budget where you could stay in a hotel room once every 10 days. Is that, I'm guessing, to like shower and have a bed? Or how did you even, because a lot of times you were sleeping outside.
Yeah, I slept outside for the most part, but then yeah, like you said, the hotel room was to shower, clean my clothes in the bathtub generally, and there was certainly a mental aspect to that. There's when you are doing something like running across the country, I would say almost even more so than doing like the Pacific Crest Trail or one of the long distance trails. Your brain is always, it never turns off at night. It's really tapping into this sort of animalistic, pre-civilized version of ourselves where you're resting most of your brain, but there's a part of your brain that is always listening for things in the woods, always sort of paying attention. And that was it was important to me once a week to go into a hotel room and simply lock the door and be able to turn that part of my brain off and get some true REM sleep.
Wow, I had never thought about it like that. So okay, so obviously for you, running is not just a hobby; it became an obsession somewhere along the way. At what point do you think running became that obsession for you?
I mean, it's always been on varying levels, some sort of obsession. I'd say my original sport was biking in the Roaring Fork Valley in the Aspen area. I lived about 20 miles outside of Aspen, but I went to school up in Aspen, and so that was 20 miles away. I'd get out of school, and without even anyone really telling me I should, I started timing myself the amount of time that it would take me to get from Aspen High School to my front door. And this went on for years. And so if we're going to use that word obsession, like I can remember just being obsessed with timing myself back then. So just kind of this very inward, self-motivated drive to improve upon myself. And then that bled over into running. I joined the cross country team when I was in high school. And so I would be competitive, not just with the team, but certainly with myself. And then on to college and post collegiate running after that. So just always, I never thought when I was in my late teens or early 20s that I would be, a sponsored athlete or, making a living at this. But I've always been trying to improve myself in some form or another. And whether that meant finishing better in a race or running a faster time in a race or in my later years as a runner in my mid to late 30s, doing things in the sport that I just feel like haven't been done before. That's the drive that keeps me going and really pushes me.
And how much of running is a competitive pursuit for you, and how much of it is a form of meditation?
It used to be almost entirely competitive pursuit. And so I joined the cross country team when I was 15 years old. I'm 39. I'll be 40 in a couple months here. So that's 25 years of running.
Wow.
And so that's, as you can imagine, if you do anything for 25 years, then there's going to be a lot of different things that motivate you over time. And the thing itself changes so many times. So I can say without hesitation that I used to be much more competitive and driven by place and time. And as I've gotten older, it's a place that I go when when I need to quiet my mind and kind of figure things out, or just breathe some fresh air, get out the door. So I can't give a definitive answer of that, but yeah, it has always changed for me.
That's really interesting. And I want to go to that moment in 2017, because at that point in time, the pursuit was, I want to get to know my fellow Americans, because we all live in this country. And obviously, you know, the election went one way when you thought it was going to go a different way. So you started in Folly Beach, South Carolina. And until that point, I understand you hadn't spent too much time in the South. So what was your first impression?
I mean, almost immediately it was just positive impressions of the South. Yeah, the only time I'd ever spent in the South before that, my mom had taken. I'm one of 5 kids, and my mom took all 5 of us on the Amtrak from Colorado out to North Carolina, and I just remember so vividly kind of going through Chicago and then down into New Orleans. I had never, I mean, from where I'm from in college, I'd never seen African American. I had never experienced humidity before. I had never really experienced cities before. And so that trip itself was so impactful to me. But just based on, you know, travel and racing and this feeling that, you know, foreign or exotic doesn't exist within our own borders. I was always searching for that other outside of our own country, and that's when I kind of realized that that it didn't. I didn't have to go on or beyond our own borders to find people that are different than me and that can teach me something. So yeah, it was pretty early on, I would say, even before I started my run. That I was experiencing Southern hospitality and just kind of a different culture. But immediately after I started, and specifically in the South, people just opened themselves up to me, and they opened up their wallets to me. They, you know, I remember on like day 4, I was already, you know, starting to feel the miles. It was sore. I had left my bag out in the woods behind a gas station to where I was going to go sleep for the night. But I went into town to get some food and dinner, and went to go pay for my dinner up at the register. And the woman there informed me that someone had bought my meal for me. And I asked her if I could thank that person. And she said they didn't want to be known.
Wow.
So I couldn't even find out who bought my meal for me. So yeah, and that just continued on throughout the South. And I'd love to say that continued on across the country. But that simply wasn't the case. It was, which isn't to say that I didn't experience that the rest of the time across the country, but it was almost entirely concentrated in the South.
That's interesting. As somebody who grew up in Georgia and Atlanta, I can understand that. But what I thought was interesting in your journey is that when you went to one town, you said how people would warn you about the next town over, and they'd say, "Oh, we're like really good people here, but like you better be careful over there." And then you'd get to that town, and they'd be super nice, and they'd warn you about the next town over. Why do you think that kept happening, and where do you think that fear stemmed from?
To be honest, I think that's human nature. I think that we've been doing that since before we were writing words down. There's this nature, this human nature of needing to protect ourselves and keep close to the people that we're physically close to. And when you don't know about the people in the next town, then we have this tendency to, either demonize them or, paint a completely different picture of them. It's like Springfield.
It's like an us versus them. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, or Springfield and Shelbyfield, or it's the Hatfields and McCoys, and this keeps going. There's a million versions of this in human history, and so it's normal to do it, what is less normal is to test that theory and realize that it's without merit and it's unfounded. So I'm not the first person to do this. I think we've had people going beyond their hometowns since the dawn of man, and it's important with every generation or even every year to keep reminding yourself that you have to take that journey in order to really appreciate that.
Did you ever, when somebody would say that to you, did you ever challenge them and say, well, why do you think that? Or have you ever gone over there, met the people, tested your theory, or how did you approach that?
I did. I challenged it often. And I realized that it didn't really get me all that far challenging it. Something that occurred to me on this trip is that I wasn't out there on foot. I wasn't out there to challenge people. The way that I was going to do that was going to be in the telling of my story afterwards. When someone tells you that, that the next town over, they're full of criminals and liars, I found that it was much more beneficial to me and to the conversation to simply say, all right, yeah, tell me about that. I want to hear about your thoughts on this. And people open up to you more when you go about it with that approach, as opposed to challenging everybody on everything.
I wonder, did you find that people spoke like that in terms of areas that were of a different demographic or socioeconomic level?
Yeah. There's no doubt that I could, pull out instances of that. Hard for me to say on that one. My inclination is to say yes, that it's, it can be race or money that does that. But yeah, I think that can be found without that. And going into specifics and thinking about specifics, then I'd hesitate to really make a solid claim about that.
Yeah, because that's what I'm curious about. I actually don't think it's just that. I think it's this like us versus them. And I think what you said about the proximity is actually much more indicative of how you feel about other groups. But were there any times where you were genuinely afraid or you were looking over your shoulder, or was it that you found common ground with everybody you met?
I didn't. Yeah. I didn't ever really feel afraid all that much. I am of a certain demographic where it's important for me to admit that it's a little bit easier for me to do that. I'm a white male. I'm in my mid-30s, and I don't have any sort of target on my back or anything like that. And this is something I wrote a book about this as well. The book is called Cross Country, and I go into that quite a bit more than I did in the movie. But I did make a conscious effort and decision at the beginning of my run to not be afraid of people or animals all that much, as best I could, as best you can say, Rickey, you are not going to be afraid of wild boars in the woods when you're going through the South. And, you hear this rustling out there in the middle of the night and you don't even have a knife to really defend yourself. You can't stop your heart from going up a few beats per second. But yeah, no, I really didn't. In terms of people, I didn't really have that all throughout. And I think I have simply fatigue to help for a lot of that. When you're putting in 25 to 50 miles a day in and day out, and perhaps not getting the best sleep. It's pretty easy for your simple fatigue to take over and prevent that from happening.
And beyond the fatigue and the exhaustion, I mean, the physical toll on your body, I can't even imagine. But what were some of the most challenging aspects of the trip, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, your life becomes so simple when you're doing something like this. I oftentimes think in my normal day-to-day life, such as a day like today, where I have to figure out what I'm doing today. I'm self-employed, and that can look like any number of different things from one day to the next. And when you're out on the road, it's really, really simple. You wake up in the morning, you run until you find coffee and a bite to eat, and then you sit down, and then you leave there and you go run some more, and then you get some lunch, and then you run some more, and then you get some dinner, and then you find a place to sleep and you go to sleep. And then you wake up the next day and you do it all over again. So that part's really simple. I suppose the most challenging thing was just like dealing with fatigue and the mental aspect of continuing on like that every day. Having a huge carrot out in front of you, Ocean Beach in San Francisco, it's pretty nice to pull you along. So yeah, it was, it's funny to look back on it and not really be able to come up with all that many challenges other than to simply keep going every day, the monotony of it.
Yeah. So one thing that I found really fascinating in the documentary is that roughly the middle of your trip, you went to Aspen, which was your home, your family and friends were there. And at that point in your journey, you felt like you had accomplished everything you set out to accomplish, yet you continued anyway. Why did you continue?
Well, because I felt like I had accomplished anything. My goal was to get to the other side of the country, and I've never really set out to complete something and not complete it. So yeah, I felt like I had gotten to know the country as well as I had wanted to. I had done a huge amount of distance by that point. I'd done about 2,600 miles. I'd seen the South, which was a big goal of mine. I'd seen a bunch of the nature trails across the country, which was a big goal. I had seen a lot of the historical trails that, in my opinion, have helped shape who we are as a country, whether that be the Santa Fe Trail going across Kansas or the Trail of Tears going across, I believe that was I have to get my places right. Tennessee and Arkansas. So yeah, by the time I got to Colorado, I kind of checked all of those boxes. But you don't know what you don't know. And what I realized is that, the next part of the journey, going from Colorado out to California through our great American desert in the middle of summertime, June and July, where the temperatures are cracking 100 degrees pretty regularly, is that you're going to get to know yourself a lot better. And that was the big journey at that point.
Wow. So I do want to talk a little bit about the mental aspect of this. I read this profile on Mike Posner, who he walked across America, and he told his brain at one point, just make it to Kansas, just make it to Kansas. Like he kept repeating that to himself over and over again. And as soon as he made it to Kansas, his body just started to fall apart. And he said, my body, my mind, my spirit, they thought I was done because I had made it to Kansas. And it was then that he kind of discovered this concept of false finish lines, where your body reacts as if you've already achieved your goals. When I was watching the documentary and you made it to Aspen, that's a little bit what it felt like, because that next stretch, I mean, your body was just like, it looked like you were struggling a little bit more than you were in the first portion of the journey. So did you have any sort of mental phrases or finish lines or things that you were thinking of to get you through all of this?
It's funny. I can pinpoint one right away, and they or maybe even two, and they're both phrases
Tell me.
from songs. And one of them is this Neil Young song that I grew up listening to. Unknown Hero, I think is what it's called, and he's singing about this woman, this waitress in a breakfast diner that leaves her job, and kind of the chorus is he's singing about her riding a Harley Davidson through the desert, and I was singing that song in my head all the way back in Arkansas, just this picture of a woman on a motorcycle out in the middle of the desert. And then I got out into the middle of the desert, and sure enough, like, in the middle of Utah or Nevada, I see this woman on a motorcycle heading towards me, and I'm like, that's it. And then there she goes. And then I'm like, uh-oh, now what do I have to look forward to? And then another one, might as well Finding Nemo. Just keep swimming, just keep swimming. But this was Tom Petty, and it was a little song that I kind of sung to myself every single morning. It's time to move on. It's time to get going. What lies ahead, I have no way of knowing. And that was just, literally that song was in my head for 5 months. And it's telling that song, I can still listen to it and really love it. But yeah, I should have a little soundtrack. I need to revisit my journey again and remember because it's funny that it wasn't 100 songs or 1,000 songs that were going through my head, but more like 5 to 10 the entire time. Yeah.
Well, one, why do you think those are important when you're doing something so repetitive and so rote? And why, and what are other things that you did to mentally to stay sane?
Yeah, stuff like that. This doing a journey like this in 2017 compared to even doing it in 2005 or any time in the 1900s. We've got these incredible things. I'm looking for my cell phone, but then I'm realizing that it's right there. I'm on the cell phone.
Got it.
And that I can look up my map. I can call up my siblings or my mom or my wife. She was my girlfriend at the time. All of these things, that's a huge part of it. And that's something that we didn't have even 10 years ago to really lean on. So that was a big part of it. But I don't know if I could even begin to really analyze the importance of mantras, of saying the same thing over and over to yourself in your head, day in and day out. And it kind of allows us to take a step back from the thing that we're actually doing, and concentrate on this repetition, the monotony of it, and allow it to be okay.
Yeah. One thing off of that I thought was interesting is that before your endeavor, you said that you thought it would actually be easier if you did this totally alone, not just physically, but also you separated from your girlfriend at the time, who is now your wife. But throughout your journey, you found yourself calling her and leaning on her for those moments of extreme fatigue and doubt and insecurity, etc. So how important is it to have an emotional support system when you're undertaking something like this?
Yeah, I think it's immensely helpful, and I'd say, even without the immediate return of a phone call or a phone conversation like that, I think that we've been doing it for a really long time. I think all you have to do is refer back to letters being written to loved ones during World War II or World War I, where you know you're not going to get a response for weeks, months, or any sort of response at all. Just knowing that somebody is out there is so important.
And Rickey, have you always had just a genuine, innate curiosity for getting to know other people?
I don't know if it's always been for getting to know other people, but I have always had a curiosity. And I found that it grew a lot on this trip, in large part because of what I like to call the costume that I was wearing. I had a much larger beard growing out, simply because I wasn't carrying a razor with me. I had this backpack. I was wearing short shorts, and you could look at me when I walked into a gas station and knew that I was doing something different. And so there was a curiosity towards me, and I was able to take that curiosity and reflect it back towards people. So I would say that it is true that I've always been interested in people, but on this trip in particular, it grew immensely, and allowed me to really tap into it at a much deeper level.
My favorite parts of the documentary were the small moments of humanity that you saw. And I'm not sure what state you were in, but that man, Jim Steele, who literally opened up his wallet and gave you all the money he had, even though you told him you didn't need it. Acts of kindness like that, like, how did that make you feel? And like, what did you take away from an experience like that?
It just kind of illuminated to me that we always have something to give to other people. And that it's not just giving something to somebody. It's not just that person that you're trying to help. And I felt like I could see it most clearly in that case that you're talking about. That was in Arkansas, when this gentleman, after I insisted 3 times that I didn't need the money, I didn't want the money that he was giving to me, that he insisted upon it, that he was giving me the money in large part because he personally needed to.
Yes.
It was doing something for him. And I still think about that specific moment to this day, and think about all the times in my life that I have been generous, either with time or money, towards other people, and how good it felt to me to be able to do that. And how on that trip, the number of times that I was providing an opportunity for other people to do something good that they knew was good in that moment. So it's an interesting sort of strange juxtaposition of generosity, where you can go way deeper into the philosophy of that. But to do good is certainly not a one-sided thing. It's both sides.
Completely. And if anybody watches that moment, they'll know immediately it wasn't about the money for Jim. It was about something totally different. And you actually have, you said after that, you said there's this level of generosity where people look out for each other. It wasn't the wealthiest people who were giving me money. Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, exactly that. I mean, you could see with Jim's truck that, he could have spent that money on his truck. He could have, any number of things. And I think that, the closer you are to the bottom, we'll call it that, the closer you are to understanding how much just a few dollars goes, or a smile or a kind word goes. The further you get away from that, the more alien it becomes to you, and the more you're distanced from it and disenchanted from it.
Absolutely. I love what Brian Stevenson says from the Equal Justice Initiative. He says, if you actually want to make a difference of any sort in the world, get proximate to suffering, and then you will understand. Is it money? Is it time? Is it kindness? Is it like, there's a lot of ways you can help beyond just making large donations to, charity. Okay. So you, at the end of this documentary, you mentioned that we're all 90% similar and 10% different, but politicians tend to latch on that 10% and just put it in our face all the time. And I think that was on full display in recent history. What are some of the characteristics that you found were common among everybody you met?
Yeah. And so I said politicians and media. I think that media does it just as much. It's a powerful tool to make us, to divide us and to make us feel different from others. But the similarities that we all have, I mean, they're really simple, basic needs. We want shelter. We want good education for our kids. We want friends. We want family. We want to feel safe. We want to be able to believe what we want to believe and pursue the dreams that we want to pursue. So when you take all of that, that's most of life right there. And that's most of our daily life and our leisure time and our work life. But it's, I have found, and I certainly found it on that trip, that, the more that you're able to take that 10% difference, and frankly, I think it's less than 10%. I'd say it's probably more like 5%. The more you're able to take that and inflate it, and the more you're able to separate people into 2 groups or 3 groups and really take advantage of that. That's where power comes.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, what did your content diet look like before this trip? And how did the content that you consume confirm some of your own biases while you were on the trip or after?
You're saying like in terms of media?
Yeah. Like what type of media did you consume before the trip?
I mean, I would say that it's much the same now. I just look at it with a much more open eye, and I would say over the past year that I have, if without getting too much into politics right now, I'd say one thing that Donald Trump has done, certainly for me in my life, is that he has made me question truth so much more than I ever have ever before in my entire life. And he's made me question media, and I still don't agree with nearly anything that he says, but just in seeing how he's able to manipulate people, I have this immense need and curiosity to go to see where people are getting their information from. And so I still get most of my information from the same sources as I did before. But I'm also pretty adamant about going to other news sources and other forms of media to see what other people are consuming.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because as somebody who has worked in media for my entire life, including CNN, it's really interesting to see that a lot of your regular American doesn't know the difference between opinion and news and entertainment. Because a lot of what you watch on CNN and Fox, it's 24/7 news, which a lot of it has to be entertaining in order for you to keep watching. And I think that's kind of, did you find that a lot of people that you met actually didn't talk about politics?
I found that politics almost never came up on my trip, which initially it was interesting. There was a couple riding their bikes across the country, I believe from Belgium, and their number one mission was to talk about politics the entire time.
Wow.
And after just a few days of running, I found that, people weren't interested in talking to me about politics all that much. They were more interested in talking to me about my trip, or about their lives, or about their church, or, that movie from the 1990s or 80s about the guy with the beard that runs across the country. And I'm like, oh, you mean Forrest Gump? And they're like, yeah, let's talk about that. And it just would have been entirely too exhausting for me to talk politics the entire time. And I think that's actually more normal to not talk politics. We've just come out of this 4 years where the talk of politics, identity politics, has became so much center of our everyday dialogue, that it was just like, you mean we don't have to talk about that? That's great. Let's talk about something else. And that's kind of where it occurred to me that kind of 90%, 10% difference is that, that it had gotten so, tainted in a way that the entire country could hardly even get off of these topics. And so that's true. Not normal. Yeah.
So I believe that I'm not very extreme in my views, and I don't judge people about their beliefs, mainly because I was born in Bulgaria. We moved to the United States when I was 8 years old, and we moved to Atlanta, Georgia, of all places. And then I spent my adult life, professional life in New York City. So to me, having that perspective allows me to understand why certain people behave the way they do, why they vote the way they do, etc. How important do you think perspective and having seen different cultures and experienced different types of people is to having empathy?
Oh, and I mean, it's such a huge part of it. It's central to it. Like I said, before I did this run across the country, I had spent the better part of 15 years traveling around the world, every single continent, South America, all over Europe, Africa, and Asia. But it's funny that I had gained empathy for so many places around the world, but I hadn't yet gained that same empathy for my own home country. And the differing of politics and opinions and beliefs was just as vast within our own borders as it is from the United States to places around Europe or even Africa. So yeah, it's immensely important to travel and to be to see other cultures. But I'm also careful to recognize that you can do that without leaving your own country, and frankly, I think you can do that without leaving your own town. And oftentimes, I had a follow-up project after my run across the country in 2018. I wanted a similar sort of journey as my run across the country, but I also wanted to stay close to home. At this point in time, I was living in San Francisco with my wife, and I decided to run every single street in San Francisco, which was a journey of about 1,300 miles over 6 weeks' time. And I saw the same vastness of that spectrum in a 7 by 7 mile square as I did on a 3,700 mile run from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And in fact, even possibly a bigger spectrum, just based on the number of different cultures that you can find in a city, and specifically a city as diverse as San Francisco.
And sometimes you can even find that empathy in your own family. And in the documentary,
if we're going to go there. Yep.
Yeah, we're going to go there. But in the documentary, you said, as I'm getting older, I noticed that we're all imperfect and I'm not immune to many of the mistakes my own dad has made. I suppose that's really hard. Empathy is at the core of understanding and appreciating that we're all complicated people. And I think very few of us have figured it out. So tell me how this journey changed the relationship you had with your dad and gave you a glimpse of, oh, hey, maybe this is why he believes the things that he believes.
Yeah. And I mean, to this day, that's still true. This past election became so toxic that, we definitely had to leave certain topics off the table. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to step back from those things, but to simply admit that even within your own family, that that you can have differing opinions. It's perfectly okay. And that's where I'm careful when people say, oh yeah, my I can't talk to this person in my family anymore because they believe this. And I just urge people to allow themselves to be challenged by that and to keep banging their head against that wall. I'm not saying that they need to try and change that person's opinion or their beliefs, but to always still try to get to the core of what they believe and why they believe it. That's where we can truly get to know and understand the rest of the world. It's not just about getting to know your family. It's about getting to know the rest of the world.
That's really cool. So at the very end of your endeavor to run across America, you end up in San Francisco, and that is the finish line for you. And I was watching it and I was like, oh my God, because it's such a massive personal accomplishment. Yet you look around and people are just going about their lives as if, everything's normal. You didn't just run across the country. They have no idea. I felt that on a much, much smaller scale when I quit my full-time job and I was on the subway in New York and it was my last day. And I was like, oh my God, what have I done? To me, my whole world has changed, but I'm looking at everybody on their phones or talking to their friends. And I'm like, do you not realize what's happening? So what was that feeling for you when you got to the Pacific Ocean and you've just accomplished this massive thing? And, the world is still, the sun is still shining, the earth is still spinning.
Yeah. I mean, that was such an important moment for both of those reasons. It was important because I had just completed this massive thing, but it was also important because it was just another moment. And I, it's a lesson that I'm gonna continue to learn for the rest of my life, and I felt that even more in that subsequent follow-up project that I did of running every street in San Francisco, where it was a daily thing. Where, I'd be 3 or 4 weeks into this journey where I'd just run 700 miles and I go into a little bodega and, get treated just like everybody else. And like, don't you understand what I'm doing? And so that one was I felt it even more during that follow-up run, because it was a daily reminder that, every single person, whether they're running across the country or getting shot out into space to the International Space Station, or giving birth to a child, or just trying to make it through this day to get to the next day, every single moment, we all just have this very specific moment in time that we're living, and they're all equally as important, no matter what we tell ourselves otherwise.
I love that. And you said something that kind of stuck with me. You said, I think we have a million versions of ourselves depending on which path we choose to take. Can you elaborate on why you were thinking of that near the end of your journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know what I was thinking exactly at that moment, but, I chose to do that journey. We make all of these micro decisions every single moment of every day, and they all have certain little effects on us, and changing the person that we are from day to day. The decisions, I don't necessarily believe that there are mistakes in life. Each of these little seemingly little mistakes that we make just form who we are as a person a little bit more every day.
That's really cool. And my final question for you is, what is a challenge that we can set for ourselves on a smaller scale, but something that you think will stress test us a little bit and help us better understand who we are and who our neighbors are?
I would say, look at the path that you take today from where you live to go to the grocery store, and realize how often it's the same path. It's almost the same path every single day. And today or tomorrow, when you go to the grocery store, the next time you go to the grocery store, choose a completely different way of getting there. And just look at what you notice differently on that simple little walk, whatever that is, a few blocks or a mile. And then the day after that, try a different path in order to go to the grocery store, or go to a different grocery store. All of these, I've been studying a lot of, we call them desire lines, these lines that we take almost in a animalistic nature. We don't actually even think about it at a certain point. To challenge that part of us in order to see something different is so important. And so that's what my project of running every single street in San Francisco was all about. It was a place that I'd lived for about 6 years at that point, and I had felt that I had gotten to know the city so well before I set out on this journey. And when I set out on this journey to run every single street in the city, it occurred to me how little I actually knew about the city, and that was entirely based on my habits and normal day-to-day patterns. So there's little practices that we can do to challenge what we think we know of a place, and actually what we think we know of ourselves.
That's amazing. So start by noticing and being aware of the path that you take every single day. That's really cool. Thank you so much for being here today, Rickey. That was great.
Thank you, Paulina. I appreciate it.